At this point, I would like to invite Rabira Anjuman Huda, International University, Bangladesh, for introducing the speaker and moderating the session.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shazara. I welcome you all to the last plenary session of plenary session 2. And in this session, we have Professor Dr. Shaila Sultana Madam with us for her talk. Dr. Shaila Sultana is a professor at the Department of English Language, Institute of Modern Language, University of Dhaka. She has been educated at Jahangirnagar University, Dhaka, Monash University, Melbourne, King's College, London, and the University of Technology, Sydney. Her research interests include trans approaches to language and identity, sociology, critical geography, and post-colonial contexts. She has authored articles in renowned international applied linguistics journals such as Linguistics and Education, International Multilingual Research Journal, International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism, Journal of Asia Pacific Communication, Asian Englishes, Translanguaging and Translation in Multilingual Contexts, International Journal of Multilingualism, and Journal of Social Linguistics. Her co-authored book titled Popular Culture, Voice and Linguistic Diversity, Young Adults on and Offline has recently been published from Macmillan Palgrave. A chapter titled Gender Performativity in Virtual Space and Linguistic and Multimodal Resources within the Local Global Interface of the Virtual Space, Critically Aware Youths in Bangladesh have also been published in Language and Culture on the margins of from Routledge Critical Studies in Multilingualism UK and Multilingual Matters USA, respectively. She is the lead editor of Routledge Handbook of English Language Education in Bangladesh. Today, Madam will be presenting on the topic titled Digital Ethnography, Ethnographic Sensibility, and Social Transformation. I would like to welcome Ma'am and to start her talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you. At first, I must thank TESOL PD for inviting me and giving this platform for sharing my ideas. The title of my presentation, as you have just heard, Dravida has mentioned, Digital Ethnography, Ethnographic Sensibility, and Social Transformation. In this presentation, specifically with reference to my own research studies and findings in the context of Bangladesh, I'll explain the theoretical underpinnings of ethnographic research, the processes involved in the research design, and the steps required for participant observation, interviews, and other data collection methods that develop ethnography sensibility. I'll also explain the necessity of maintaining the ethical boundaries. At the end, I'll briefly discuss the role of digital ethnography in social transformation. You will hear lots of I in it. I don't think that it is a presentation of self-glorification. It is not, because ethnographic study is something like that. The researcher puts herself within the research, and the research story is constructed both by the research participants and the researcher. And I also believe that, rather than giving example from other situations, other contexts, since I'm addressing students and teachers from Bangladesh, it is better to give examples from Bangladesh. And that is the reason, I am not using any slide as such. I'll be talking my experiences of digital ethnography in the context of Bangladesh. So first question is, why am I interested in digital spaces? So we have become more techno-friendly. Computers, internet, mobile, networking play significant roles in our life. And inclusion of the digital site into the ethnographic research capture the complexity of life in a global world and the openness and versatility in experiences we are exposed to because of the internet. There is no way, as a social linguist, I may delimit the research to traditional physical space only. Digital spaces seem to provide a unique platform for socially, culturally, and politically marginalized segment of the society for engaging in alternative discourses. There are research studies that show how digital spaces are used for raising new voices and negotiations of identities. With reference to a research study done on young women internet users in Mumbai, India, Bhattacharya and Ganesh in 2011 showed that Indian women tend to use internet for their own pleasure, challenging the structured and ambiguous notions of Indian culture and Indian femininity. In the context of Bangladesh, similar to countries like India, South Africa, Brazil, Lebanon, USA, digital spaces provide Bangladeshis, specifically those who do not conform to the heteronormative sexuality, a critical space, where they have the freedom of going beyond the socially and culturally accepted sexual orientation. And I can refer to research studies done by Shuchi Karim. I have also one or two research publications which prove that. However, these research studies mentioned about do not look into the micro dimension of people in Bangladesh, missing out the opportunities of exploring how social dynamics such as gender, religion, nationalism, or age discursively negotiated and become emergent in spatial realities of individual life. We also see that nowadays, even if you look at Bangladeshi digital spaces, that digital spaces are used for spreading violence, prejudices, misogyny, fanaticism, intolerance, and based on political, religious, ethnic, racial, and nationalistic values and ideologies. So these are the reasons why I have chosen digital space as research site. And I have published few articles and book chapters on research done through virtual ethnography until 2019. And since 2018, because this is a very relevant topic for human existence nowadays. In fact, since 2018, Routledge has been asking me to write a book about this. And recently I could manage some time and address the demand and sign a book contract with them. So many of the issues that I'm going to talk today will be extensively covered in this book. So what is the difference between ethnography and digital ethnography? So digital ethnography has emerged from ethnography. In fact, there is not much difference between digital ethnography and ethnography as such in terms of ethos. The ontology, the epistemology, the data collection method, the interpretation, all these things in fact similar. That is why, Dhiraj Murthy in 2008 stated that as ethnography goes digital, its epistemological remit remains much the same. Ethnography is about telling stories. When ethnographers come back from the field, they become the storytellers. They have something to tell about. Good ethnography effectively communicates a social story, drawing the audience into the daily lives of the respondents. While the introduction of new technologies, the stories have remained vivid, but the ways they were told have changed. So the only major difference between ethnography and digital ethnography is what is being studied, the nature and types of data and how the stories are told. For example, in the context of Bangladesh, in my research, in order to conduct digital ethnography, I need to explore participants' use of English, Bangla, Hindi, or any other languages that they use, the manipulation of signs, symbols, multimodal materials on the digital spaces. The digital spaces, because of their flexibility and fluidity, give more opportunities to understand how people use different resources in the digital spaces. What sorts of gendered, classed, or nationalistic subjectivities they negotiate in these spaces. In other words, multimodal analysis of the images, photos, diverse materials used by the participants in digital spaces is an important dynamic of digital ethnography. In digital ethnography, we need to develop ethnographic sensibility and understand how they use multimodal resources to build up their digitally mediated space, engaged in interaction, and negotiate position. So why did I opt for ethnography? My next question. The ethos of ethnography tally with the way I consider language and culture, the way I believe language and culture should be explored. In other words, my perspectives about the nature, what is being studied, that is ontology, and how to best understand this object to study, that is epistemology, are in tune with the ethnography. The perspectives about language, culture, society promoted in ethnography are ontologically mine too. Language is contextual, social, cultural, historical, and processual. Ethnographic notion of language is situated because of its emergence from human interaction in social situation. Language is never a product. It is never static. It is always emerging in anew. So when ethnography appreciates the humanness of language, culture, or identity, it creates the opportunity to bring it out. I see that ethnographic perspective is ontological to my research. As a post-structuralist, I also see that language is not a mere combination of fixed structures. It doesn't float in a vacuum. It is given meaning by us. It goes through the constant process of semiotic reconstruction. And because of these views, I see it mandatory to the construction of knowledge on language practice to look at not only the linguistic features of language or the contextual or physical properties of space, but also the social and historical construction and organization of space. For example, how spaces are organized and why. What role they play in our language practices. What thoughts and ideologies are brought into the space, by whom, with whom, how we relate themselves, with the space, and consequently what contradictions we experience because of our socioeconomic characteristics and so on. So ethnographic studies have, special significance in observing social phenomena, be it language, society, or identity. The observation, collection of data, analysis of data from ethnographic sensibility are very much, epistemologically idiosyncratic to it. So ethnography allows us to look into the language practices beyond synchronic events and consider all the unseen processes that go before and after the language practice as they evolve, as they emerge within the digital spaces. Both researchers and research participants, for example, the research participants and I, the researcher, have an active role in the process of knowledge construction. The dialogic and interpretive nature of the ethnographic study itself, the dialogues between the participants, space, and me, as a researcher, make the research inevitably interpretive. These stands, in fact, reflect an important notion of interpretivism, which is called Verstehen, a German word that means understanding or interpreting of meaning of human activity. Both participants and I try to understand them as socially constructed beings, both constituted and mediated by their own selves in constant negotiation between language, space, and subject positions. So ethnography allows us to be critical about language, culture, and social dynamics. In fact, criticality is ontological to ethnographic research, to my research, and very much welcomed in ethnography. I have interest in broader power relationship between participants in society, as well as among participants based on their language, education, and socioeconomic background. I do not intend to only look into the superficial mixing of English, Bangla, or Hindi. I want to know what subjective or social dynamic forces impact on speakers' mix of English, Bangla, and Hindi. And that is why it is also important that I opt for ethnographic research. In a socially stratified society like Bangladesh, in fact, it is even more important because ethnography allows us to question the social values and ideologies and critically evaluate the systems of meaning in different practices and eventually identify exploitation and marginalization. In addition, my interest in broader power relationship between participants in society as well as among participants themselves based on the language, gender, socioeconomic background, make the research, this ethnographic research, also critical. So when we move beyond the text, because I'm not looking to the text only, we can bring in participants' interpretation into it. We managed to strike a balance between emic and ethic point of view. So striking a balance between emic, like the culture-specific insight or perspective, and ethic, the interpretive standpoints, I can come up with a realistic, multi-layered interpretation of participants' language practices. Thus, the research ensure an intensive engagement with a holistic understanding of the context. And ethics is very important because we are immersed into the research context in the digital space. It is important that we maintain the ethics. The principle of ethic that repeatedly has been mentioned is the principle of care. Care is core value to the internalized and acted on through the watchfulness and assurance of the researcher. We have to have an informed constant, from the research participants. The consent from the research participants are important. We have to make sure that there is, no institutional and legal risk. We have to ensure anonymity because within the quotation mark, anonymizing does not require. We have to understand that we are not robbing off the possibility of listening to the stories of the participants when we are anonymizing them. It is not. So the changes need not sacrifice the ethnographic richness and research vitality and validity. So in most of the cases, research participants' physical world identities need to be, anonymized, very important. Huh? And we need to be very cautious so that names are not visible in any chat windows or elsewhere. And we have to make sure that they're blurred and moved out. In some digital worlds, we must anonymize not just the faces or screen names, but places too. Very important. And we should not be, since we'll be, looking into the digital spaces, there is every possibility we can, hide ourselves as well and lurk. That shouldn't be the case. Deception is totally against the spirit of ethnography, because ethnographic research is based on the relationship of goodness, directness, consideration. So deception should not be any way of looking into the digital life of the research participants. Again, this is a space, ethnographic space is both researchers and participants, and there is every possibility of becoming very intimate with the research participants. But as a researcher, we have to make sure that we maintain that space between our participants and us, so we do not become too intimate with them. And there should be a certain goodness in our heart. So there should be always a way of compensation to support them, rather than always thinking that I will have to use the data. So whatever way we want to get from the data, we should do that. It shouldn't be the way. And when we take the leave, we also have to make sure that we say proper goodbye to them, because ethnographic research usually run for 3-4 months or years after years. So if we suddenly leave, that participants may feel confused, betrayed, or abandoned. So we also have to inform them when we start, as we inform them. When we leave, we also have to inform them. And when we write about them, the participants, their stories, their life trajectories, we also have to make sure that we have an accurate portrayal of their life. I have to mention a very beautiful quotation from Malinowski from 1922. And he says that, that the goal of an ethnographic study is, quotation, quote, to grasp the native's point of view, his relation to life, and to realize his vision of his world. So we should be sympathetically, depict participants' life, specifically when they have experiences, different sides of discrimination and violences. So how do I collect data in digital ethnography? I surf on the walls of the participants on a regular basis from 3 simultaneous perspectives, incorporating both micro and macro dimension of the language. The commonly accepted typical norms that I observe in the digital discourses, which is called NetSpeak by Crystal in 2001. I look into the idiosyncratic particular forms of language and discourse style emerging from the creative amalgamation of English, Bangla, or any other languages, which Blomert called supervernacular. And I also look into the voices that are influenced by a variety of contextual parameters. I also look into the images, memes, music clips, used by participants. So keeping in consideration the variety of linguistic and non-linguistic resources, I try to understand how participants discursively construct their identity. Here, Twitter, Instagram, FB pages, blogs, YouTube comments, these are the things I have explored so far. So what are the methods I usually do for ethnographic research? It involves a family of methods that ensure direct and sustained contact with participants. The purpose of ethnography is not to ensure the viability or reliability or falsifiability of the research. Nevertheless, the very kind of data collection method, for example, interview, observation, focus group discussion, all these methods, in fact, allow me an interpretation, which are more comprehensive, and hence the findings in this ethnography research are very much, idiographic, to use the Kantinian term, idiosyncratic to the participants and to me. So multiple methods, observation, interviews, focus group discussion, ensure both thick participation, which is the very specific term used by Sarangi in 2007, and thick description. This is again another term used by Geertz in 1973. So on the one hand, thick description requires me to observe the participants closely in their interaction, which become potentially significant for building up a detailed picture of the language practices and space. In classical ethnography, these aspects ensured a detailed description of culture of exotic people. Eventually, what happens is that I develop ethnographic sensibility. And then I feel of the relationship amongst the participants and language practices and their locatedness in space. Another important is now, how do we work with images, videos, and textual data? In my research, for example, I gather audio, visual, graphic, audio, photographic, textual data, and I give equal attention to textual and visual representation of data. Hence, I don't overwhelm myself with multimodal analysis. Nevertheless, I do pay attention to visual and graphic data, background, color, font styles, drawings, emoticons, and photographs. I capture the screen so that I may record the original font without any correction or spelling. So but if your research is more concerned with video and imagery, you will have to identify a multimodal framework for fine-grained analysis. All the data need to be saved in files, classified and sorted out in folders and subfolders as data. Another important point is writing ethnographic research. See, that as this experience of conducting the ethnographic research is subjective, so is the writing. Whatever I write in relation to it is very much a subjective representation. I take a post-structuralist stance when I look into data in time and space and the socio-cultural stance. So all ethnographic work is represented in writing, which is different from the raw data collected from the field. And ethnographers, to some extent, need to follow a genre of reporting. After all, by the name itself, like the ethnography, suggests the centrality of writing to its accomplishment. And Ramanathan and Atkinson have mentioned about it. So I do not try to keep all the complexities of social life in distance by simplification, and that is why I have always trouble in writing within 6,000 words when different journals ask or the editors ask me to write in 6,000 words. Because ethnographic research is quite difficult to frame within limited words, because there's so much to talk about in a one single word. For example, for the book, our book that just came out, the handbook, the Routledge Handbook of English Education in Bangladesh, I analyzed 2 words, cat and fast, and I have spent almost 8,000 words only to describe these 2 words. So ethnographic research is like that. I'm almost at the end of my presentation, and that is, how we can use ethnographic research for transformation of the society. Very important. Digital space can sustain and reproduce the vicious circle of value and ideologies associated with nation, national language, national symbol, exaggerated pronunciation, exemplified in orthographic patterns, slang, swear words, images, quotations, or memes are used to represent hyper-nationalistic identity attributes. These are also resources that instigate verbal abuse, violence against people from different nations and nationalities. Bangladesh is also conflicted by this liberal interpretation of religion and local interpretation of Islam based on local preachers. Religious identity is biased based on partial and inadequate understanding of religion of many occasions. And that is why it is important that, specifically in the context of Bangladesh, that we bring these digital discourses to the front. We can also use digital discourses in classroom for developing critical awareness in students. Thus, digital ethnography may minimize the urgency, struggle, disparity, and inequalities based on language, nation, religion, and gender in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful, wonderful talk. I personally learned a lot, I can say that. So now it's time for the question answer session. I would invite anyone who has a question. Is there any question that you want to ask, ma'am, about the topic and the presentation? Ma'am said a very timely and insightful talk by Professor Dr. Shaila Sultana and Rakib Chaudhary.
I have a question, just a quick question, sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's about, I'm just thinking how ethnography is different from autoethnography. Or ethnography.
The word auto itself tells it. one person, just like, the person talks about her own self in terms of, whatever social phenomena or individual phenomena that person wants to explore. So the autoethnography, in fact, looks into the person who is writing it, explores her own experiences.
So the researcher himself or herself is telling the story, right?
Yes, yes. So she talks about her own social experiences, personal experiences or individual experiences in day-to-day life in relation to certain topic that she wants to explore. So that is autoethnography.
Yeah, it's wonderful to know about digital autoethnography also. Digital?
That is, the ethnography that we conduct on different digital spaces. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Pravida, I have a comment, if that's all right.
Yes, sir. Yes. Sir, do you have a question, sir?
Yes, more like a comment. Shaila, first of all, very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. I don't know much about digital ethnography, but I learned a lot from your presentation. I think the way we classify ethnography is not very straightforward. So we have digital and non-digital ethnography. There is one kind of taxonomy or
you can say that, all the books that and from my own experiences, because I have done ethnography on real space as well as on digital spaces, and I have seen that, in ethos, in spirit, in principle, both of them the same. The only differences that I observe from my own experiences, and as all the research studies have mentioned, that the elements that we are dealing with are different. For example, in digital spaces, we have different way of meaning making processes. For example, we have memes, we have audios, we have news link. So these are the elements, and the way we analyze these elements are different. Other than that, in principle, in ethos, they are same.
Yeah, I was about to say that a different type of classification is, for example, critical ethnography, institutional ethnography, and then you have classical descriptive ethnography. So my comment was digital ethnography is a different type of classification because institutional or critical ethnography. So those, for example, who that would follow Foucault, for example.
Critical, yes.
Yeah, that's right. So that can also be digital ethnography. So there might actually be something called digital institutional or digital critical ethnography, and that's when things get complicated.
We will have to, we are good at coming up with terms, that, right? Look at all we're so good at serving the old wine in new bottles. So perhaps in few years, we may come up with this term. You don't know, Rakib.
We got another one here. And I think you would be a right person to make that connection between digital and the other traditional forms of ethnography. So thank you, Shaila. A great presentation.
Thank you, Rakib, for being here.
One last observation and question to Shaila. When Beth was talking about during her presentation about the ethnographic study that we did, just a question that in a physical ethnography, we stayed in the site for a long period of time. I just want to know, when you're talking about digital one, is there a time frame that you've been observed on a digital space?
Yes, there is also, it depends, what sorts of digital ethnography you're doing. On many occasions, there are groups of people who are engaged in certain games for certain spirit. So you have to be in that group for hours and engage in different activities, observe them in their, in their activities, as well as we also have to identify time in order to engage in interview, conversation with them. So as we do in a physical ethnography, we have to do the same thing in the digital ethnography. So as we spend hours from dawn to dusk, for example, for my PhD thesis, I did it from dawn to dusk. I spend days after days with my research participants. So for digital ethnography as well, I have to spend certain hours a day where, with those participants and observing them in different activities within the digital space.
Another interesting could be when we were observing one particular site, we were studying a shared values of culture of a particular community.
Yes.
So in a digital ethnography, how do you select that kind of community on the site where have a similar shared values and the culture that we are going to observe?
So it again depends on what sorts of research you want to do. For example, if you want to do research on heteronormative practices, whatever idea you have in your mind, you have to explore at first, in a physical space with whom you want to work. So you have to do that homework and identify the samples and then explore, whether these groups are very active. And if there are certain groups which are only active on digital group, different gamers, for example, if you want to do different research studies on those gamers, so we have to look into that. And then there are websites and blogs which work for certain political, ethos in their mind. And if you want to see that how they are, discursively constructing those political ethos or religious ethos, you immediately, know who to go. So it depends again, Said, what kind of research you are doing. That research question will tell you, where you will find out the research participants. And according to that, you contact them.
Thank you. Dravida, please close
Thank
the
you
session.
so much, ma'am and sir, everyone, for the wonderful discussion. And with this, we will be ending the last plenary talk of session 2. And I will be handing over to the hosts. Thank you so much.
So much, Dr. Dravida Anjuman Huda, for wonderfully conducting the session, and thank you so much, Shaila ma'am, for a wonderful session. I learned a lot, and now we are going to give you a certificate on behalf of TESOL Society of Bangladesh.
Part of digital ethnography.
Part of digital ethnography.
Thank
yes.
you. Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.